my name is Agnes Szunomar. I am a senior research fellow here at the Institute of World Economics, but also an associate professor at Corvinus University of Budapest, and my main research topic is East Asia, emerging regions in Asia, and China in particular. And I focus on China, Central and Eastern European relations as well.
Right, that's what I want to talk about. Hungary is part of the so-called 17+1 structure. Why did Hungary join that?
Well, actually, all the Central and Eastern European countries joined that initiative when it has been started about 10 years ago. And the reason was that at that time, all of the countries in the region see an economic opportunity, a business opportunity in doing relations with China. It was after the global economic crisis of 2008. All of the countries learned from the crisis that it is better to diversify relations, so not to depend only on Western European countries, but also diversify towards emerging regions. And I think that at that time it was mainly economic rationale that drove most of the countries towards cooperating with China. And for some smaller countries in the region, it was also an opportunity to meet with Chinese leaders regularly.
In 2013, Xi Jinping in Kazakhstan opened, or mentioned the Belt and Road project, which was then Belt and Road Initiative, still another name then. Later that expanded. How does the 17+1 relate to the Belt and Road project?
Well, although it was launched earlier than the Belt and Road, but I think that it has become a part of the Belt and Road initiative. So those initiatives serve the same goal to broaden China's relations, to expand towards various regions, and also to gain foothold in the European Union. And for that purpose, especially the EU members, Central and Eastern European countries, provide a very good basis. Now,
you mentioned the EU. The EU has issued a policy paper a couple of years ago in which it calls China a systemic rival. How does it go down in Hungary, and how does it affect the cooperation with China?
I would say that in the past few years, Hungary doesn't really follow the EU's stance, especially not on China. So we are building friendly ties with China, well, not just in the past few years, but it is already from the early 2000s that we are trying not to harm the relation with political tensions. We try to vote in favor of China in various international organizations, including the EU, and try not to harm the relations.
Now the opposition has made a campaign issue about this university thing. They also against the railroad project between Belgrade and Budapest. In the case that they win, are these projects still scale backable?
It's really hard to tell because most of the details are still confidential. When it comes to the Budapest-Belgrade railway or when it comes to the Fudan campus, which means that we do not really know what are the current level of engagement in these regards. So I'm not sure if it is manageable to just stop all the two projects. I could imagine that in the case of the Fudan campus, it can still be related, and not only because of the opposition, but I can imagine that for Fudan, which is a very good university, probably their reputation is far more important than having a campus in a country that is against that particular campus. So even without the opposition winning the elections, I can see some possibility for that Fudan will withdraw from this initiative. When it comes to the Budapest-Belgrade railway projects, it's a more difficult issue since in the Serbian side there are some certain construction done already. The line is operational, at least part of the line is operational, which means that I don't think that it is possible to just stop it, although some renegotiations could happen, since it seems that the Hungarian section is far more expensive than the Serbian section, although the length of the two sections is almost the same.
The idea, if I understand well, from the Belt and Road in Europe is that they want to use Piraeus harbour in Greece as a starting point and spread the products up to Belgrade and then through the railway and other roads to Budapest into the EU. Now there have been examples in, I believe, Sri Lanka, but also in other countries where countries were not able to pay back the loans China was providing to create these products. In Montenegro there was a huge problem with a bridge project.
It's the Bar-Borealar highway together with the bridge.
Which then resulted in Montenegro having to tap into social funding for pregnant single mothers, which resulted in a lot of protests. Is there any concern in Hungary that similar things may happen?
Probably the economic conditions here are more favorable, so probably we don't have to be afraid of such situation as happened in Sri Lanka or in Montenegro. But of course, having too much loans, and these are not preferential loans, I would like to stress, especially in a country that have access to EU funds, structural funds, it's of course questionable, and it is questioned quite often from international organizations as well as Hungarian oppositions and experts. But sometimes it has been mentioned even from the government side that this project is not necessarily only about economic rationale, but there are some political rationales in that. So even the Prime Minister himself admitted that in one of his interviews, as far as I can remember. So it is not just about having a new railway line between Budapest and Belgrade, but it is also serving as a testing ground for a Chinese flagship project.
What kind of pressure does Orban face, direct pressure from Brussels, in order to scale down this cooperation with China?
Well, there has been some issues when the project started. So officially this project should have been ready for several years by now. It has been initiated more than 8 or even 9 years ago, as far as I can remember. And that time the public procurement procedure was totally neglected. And that was the main point when Brussels could step in and stop the whole procedure. But later on, since we had the public procurement process, so we had the tender and everything was officially as it should be, I think that legally there was no other opportunities from Brussels side. But of course, there are some certain elements that are still questionable since all the details are confidential.
Coming back to the Fudan campus, so certainly Fudan is a very famous university in China, but some here, the opposition in Hungary is worried about academic freedom, and you know, certainly with Xi Jinping, China is changing a lot. What do you think about that?
We don't know too many information about how this campus would operate, what type of students it recruit. But as far as we know, the tuition fee would be relatively high, as in other Chinese campuses for foreign students. So probably the target group is not the Hungarian studentship, but students from China who would like to study in Europe at a Chinese university, as well as students from elsewhere, including from Europe, but from other emerging regions who would like to have a double degree of a Fudan university based in the European Union. So I don't see it as a threat from an ideological point of view. The problem could be, although I am not an expert on higher education, that probably such a good university could afford paying higher salaries to professors. They can even invite some of the Hungarian professorships to that new campus, which is kind of a brain drain within the country. And that could, of course, create a huge competition for the not that strong Hungarian higher education institutions, universities mainly.
Yeah. And you see why the Hungarian government, they send out the Central Euro University, and instead of Central Euro University, they welcome Fudan University. That makes sense to do this.
I think that this is one of the major problems with the whole project. So I think that without kicking out the CEU from Hungary, the Hungarian society wouldn't really be that anxious because of the Fudan project, as with this story getting forward. So since We got rid of the CEO because it is a foreign university. Then a few years later, we invited another foreign university. So it is the most problematic issue in the whole story, I would say, because otherwise we could be even happy because a university with good reputation chooses Budapest as one of the potential locations for its campus. So this was one of the major issues that resulted in some tensions from Hungary, and the other one was the location, the preferred location for the university, which should have been officially part of the Hungarian student city program. Different type of housing opportunities for students from the Hungarian countryside, and it seems that this project is not deleted but just narrowed down or shrinked because of the Chinese project, which again sends a very negative message for the Hungarian society. So I would say that it is not necessarily China to be blamed for this whole decision, but it is rather the Hungarian government that somehow forgot about these potential tensionous points, yet invited Fudan, although we don't know who invited the Fudan campus to be realized here. But with all these in the background, it has become one of the topics of the election campaign.
Okay. So you think if or when win, the Fudan project will pursue?
We will see. As I've mentioned, since I think that it was not just China but Fudan University itself that was relatively surprised what happened after this whole project has been announced. So probably there was assured from Hungarian side that this project is going to be smooth and just fine, and everybody will be happy and welcoming with this campus. But later on, as it turned out that the Hungarian society, as well as the opposition parties, as well as the mayor of the district where the university campus would be located, and the mayor of Budapest are absolutely against this whole idea. I could imagine that even if Orbán wins, it will be the Fudan University that will choose another location for its European campus, because they don't want to have a bad reputation, they don't want to have a bad image in the international media because of this project.
Besides the place for the campus, there's also a question of money. So even in China, I see a lot of people said, well, if the Hungarian side must pay mostly all the money for the construction. If I were Hungarian, I were against this project also. So
Yes, probably that's the third point. So I should have mentioned that one as well, that usually when CU arrived, for instance, they invested a lot in creating CU here. They even built new buildings, and they even paid for the original building by themselves. And it is in a large contrast with the fact that we would pay for a Chinese construction company to build a campus from a Chinese state bank loan. So that's absolutely in contrast. And these three things together was more than enough for the Hungarian parts of the Hungarian society and the Hungarian opposition to react so negatively to this issue.
Yeah, talking about money, you said Hungary received massively from the EU, but from China also, I see there is Hungary has issued several times recently, it's December 2021, Hungary has issued a green bond in China about 1 billion renminbi. So do you know is the total amount of the bond issued in renminbi, is it published? People know what is the amount and what is used for?
I don't think that the majority of people know about that it has been issued, and they don't really know what to do with it. I think that it is more to do with the relations between the Chinese National Bank and the Hungarian National Bank. So, as I've mentioned, when it comes to the Budapest-Belgrade railway or some other projects, the 5G project, for instance, Hungary is happy to serve as a testing ground for China. because it believes that it enhances the relations between the two countries. So it is another proof of our commitment towards China, which we don't know, of course, but probably later on can bring some benefits. But when it comes to real benefits, although we talk a lot about Chinese money flowing to Hungary, but if you check the data on foreign direct investment from China, it is still around just 2 or 3% of total foreign direct investment here, which is far away from, for instance, the German FDI stock and even less than Japanese, South Korean or Indian investments. Yet we talk a lot about China. So I think that we talk a bit more about China, China's economic presence in Central and Eastern Europe and Hungary than we should, based on the numbers.